the history of all video game adaptations, it is rare that you see one that is universally considered not garbage. In the early 90s, Hollywood tested the waters with the very first video game movie, Super Mario Bros. A bizarre yet oddly delightful film that didn't quite nail it. And yet, it was a start. Following this, we received a handful of fighting video game movies. An odd choice considering how few story elements there were on a moment-to-moment gameplay basis. Things carried on through the 90s into the 2000s, and the pendulum swung from fighting games to horror games. Paul W.S. Anderson's Resident Evil saga kicked off in 2002. We also got some so-so adaptations of House of the Dead, Alone in the Dark, Blood Rain, and Doom. The Resident Evil films, despite being a commercial success, never quite connected with die-hard fans who wanted nothing more than to just see a faithful adaptation of the first handful of games. You see, that's the difficult thing with video game adaptations. From inception, there is an immediate split in terms of priorities. Before all else, the studio has to make something that can connect with casual audiences, people who've never played the game before, so that they can make money. Hollywood is a business after all. But you also need to make something that will resonate with the fans who made these games a success in the first place. This is the battle that every video game movie fights, and so many of them lose because they're unable to walk that very fine line between creative integrity and something that will make money. If we fast forward to the modern day, we've begun to get closer to cracking the code of something that can appeal to casual audiences and still make something that honors the game. We're not quite there yet, and there is still work to be done, but we're making strides, that's for sure. However, in order to talk about the subject of this video, we have to turn back the clock to 2006, because today we're going back to Silent Hill. What's going on, guys? Welcome back to The Shelf. My name is Mark, and in this video we are going to talk about Silent Hill 2006 from director Christoph Gans. The goal of this video is to adequately explain why, in my opinion, Silent Hill 2006 is the best, most faithful adaptation of any video game ever made. First, we need to establish a bit of context for where Silent Hill was at as a franchise prior to the film being made. The Silent Hill franchise began in 1999 on the Sony PlayStation with the release of the first game from Konami. Silent Hill is a survival horror series with a heavy emphasis on atmosphere and explores serious, more adult themes. You know, at the time, Resident Evil was also very popular, but Silent Hill served to be, sort of a direct counterpoint to Resident Evil. Resident Evil is more sarcastic and quippy and feels more like a B horror movie, with rocket launchers and that kind of thing. Silent Hill 1 was a huge success and gave way to 3 more sequels from developers Team Silent. Team Silent are the creative minds who established the series and really made it what it was. Silent Hill 4: The Room would mark the end of Team Silent's involvement with the franchise, and the development of future games would mostly be handled by Western developers from this point onward. Many fans of Silent Hill consider these first 4 games to be the golden era of Silent Hill. This is where director Christoph Gans comes in. Gans had first gotten his feet wet with adapting media to the screen with his first film, Crying Freeman, a movie based on the manga series of the same name. Gans was a self-proclaimed pop culture freak, expressing a real passion for video games, comics, and manga. In an interview, Gans would reflect on his first experiences with the PlayStation 1. He recalls how he stayed home for a week and played games like Resident Evil and Tomb Raider. During this experience, he came to the realization that films and television would soon have a real competitor in the form of video games. As far as storytelling mediums went, video games, in his mind, were rapidly approaching the quality of films and television. Gans has had a real reverence for video games since the late 90s. As we will discover, he never approached the idea of adapting Silent Hill as just a paycheck. It was a real passion project for him. Gans would go on to discuss how he eventually got the chance to meet the Silent Hill creators, and he was pleasantly surprised to discover that they were just as inspired by films as he was inspired by video games. Many fans of Silent Hill will know that Team Silent were deeply influenced by David Lynch, Twin Peaks specifically, the film Jacob's Ladder, and other Western properties. So Gahn's approach to adapting the games was very sincere. His approach was to try to convey the experience of having visited Silent Hill and knowing the town inside and out. He would go on to emphasize that Silent Hill does not fit into the usual horror film format with all the jump scares. It's not a horror film, it's a nightmare. The very nightmare where I had found myself imprisoned. So Gans would receive a lot of praise from fans of the game when the film came out. And he cited that a lot of the criticism that he got was from people who didn't really like the games and were instead just kind of looking for a conventional horror film. These sorts of conventional horror films were really rampant during this time. Gans would go on to say that jump scares would have been out of place in the Silent Hill nightmare, in that slanted, weird vision of a place, in that journey into a bad dream. So in this same interview, Gans would explain how he and producer Samuel Hadida acquired the rights to the game. Gans explained that, he wasn't the only one looking to adapt the game. He cited Miramax and Cruz and Wagner as their direct competition for purchasing the rights from Konami. So in an effort to stake his claim, Gans recorded himself on a tape essentially giving his pitch for how he would adapt Silent Hill to the screen. In the process of this pitch, he demonstrated a deeper knowledge of Silent Hill than anybody else. He talked for around 40 minutes, subtitled it in Japanese, and sent the tape off to the creators of Silent Hill. They immediately saw that Gans knew what he was talking about and really, wanted to make a faithful adaptation. They sensed that he would do their game justice, and he won the rights right then and there. Gans' deep reverence and respect and admiration for the game came across. Team Silent understood that Gans was not looking to just cash in on their IP, that he was a rabid fan and really wanted the chance to do the game justice. So not only did Gans have Konami's blessing, but he also had the blessing of the studio, TriStar. Around this time, horror films were booming, with an average of 3 horror films releasing in US theaters every month. So the producers just told Gans and his crew to do whatever they wanted, just trusting that the film would make money regardless of any interference on their end. Gans reportedly also got very little studio notes once filming had wrapped, something that doesn't really happen all that often. The big mandate forced upon Gans was that he include a side plot with Sean Bean's character, fearing that there was very little male presence in the film, and they were worried that, audiences wouldn't dig that, I guess. Gans agreed, and aside from this change, he pretty much had final cut on the film. This was considered exceedingly rare at the time, especially given Gans' limited resume. Something else that really illustrated the amount of respect that Gans had for the franchise was the way he treated not only the creators of the series, but the fans as well. All throughout production, Gans engaged with fans, answering questions, hearing feedback, etc. To me, this really drives home how seriously Gans took this project. He didn't have to do this, but he just felt like that was the thing that he should do. And personally, I just really respect that. He felt that it was important that fans of the games knew that the film was going to be made by, quote, one of them. He reflected on this decision later on in the same interview, and cites it as one of the reasons that the film was as successful as it was. He would also express surprise that more films didn't opt to take this same approach. Gans also stated during this interview that at the time that Silent Hill was made, studios looked down on video games and didn't really consider them to be anything serious. But Gans understood Silent Hill for what it was, a piece of art. The industry has changed a little bit these days. Things like The Last of Us from HBO have really shown how incredible the stories in some of these video games are, and they're experienced in a way that no other medium can deliver. The time you spend in a game can often exceed the amount of time that any movie or even a TV show can, really offer. Dozens upon dozens of hours immersed in a game, living with the same characters, really living that story. Gans recognized this all the way back in 1999. And Only now is Hollywood just starting to catch up. In this sense, Gons really was ahead of his time. So with some of the background and the foundations laid, let's get into the actual story of Silent Hill. The film uses story beats, characters, and locations from various Silent Hill games, but aside from that, on a narrative level, the film really is doing its own thing. As we go through the story, I will point out comparisons and direct references to the video games wherever we encounter them. I will try my best to be as thorough as possible, but it's very likely that I will miss one or two references. So, if I do miss anything, please let me know down in the comments about some hidden Easter egg to one of the games that I inevitably will have missed. The film begins with the TriStar logo, accompanied by an actual track from the Silent Hill OST, the titular Silent Hill track. Right away, this little detail lets fans know that they are in good hands, and it's very comforting knowing that the film was able to secure Akira Yamaoka's library of music for the film. Akira Yamaoka is the composer for the majority of the first Silent Hill games, and is even involved to this day with the upcoming Silent Hill F. After some production company logos, we immediately cut to a married couple looking for their sleepwalking daughter, Sharon, played by Jodelle Ferland. This scene features a really sick transition as the camera zooms down into the abyss and turns into the other world, foreshadowing what is to come in the film. Apparently Sharon has been having these nighttime excursions for some time now, and her parents, Rose and Chris, played by Radha Mitchell and Sean Bean respectively, are at a loss as to how to handle this situation. As Rose is searching for Sharon, she's going underneath an overpass, and we can see the name Cheryl spray painted on the wall behind her. Cheryl is the name of Harry Mason's daughter, the protagonist of the first Silent Hill game, and the loose blueprint that this film is built on. Rose eventually finds Sharon and is able to grab her before she plummets into the abyss. And for the time being, everything is okay. We then cut to the next day where Rose and Sharon are lounging in a lush field. Then Rose tells Sharon that they are gonna go to Silent Hill, a place which Sharon speaks about in her sleep. Only Sharon doesn't recall her sleepwalking incidents. We then learn that Sharon and Rose are gonna go to Silent Hill alone, without Chris. They seem to be in disagreement about how to best treat their ailing daughter. So Rose and Sharon head to Silent Hill, and Chris tries to call them on his cell phone, but he gets no response. So instead he goes to the internet to try to get some information on Silent Hill, assuming that that is where they are headed. So we cut back to Rose and Sharon, and they're en route to Silent Hill. Right after the sun goes down, they stop at a gas station to fuel up. A lady cop named Sybil Bennett shows up, played by Laurie Holden, and Sybil witnesses Sharon kind of freaking out over her weird kid drawings. Apparently she doesn't remember drawing them. The character of Sybil Bennett first appeared in the original Silent Hill from 1999. She is the secondary protagonist of that game alongside Harry Mason, and seeing as how Rose is sort of a female interpretation of Harry Mason's character, her inclusion in this story flows pretty well on a narrative level. So anyway, Sharon's weird drawings seem to indicate what is happening or what will happen later in the story. Rose goes into the gas station and asks the patrons about Silent Hill, but she only gets a cryptic response and is also told that her cards have been declined. Rose then calls Chris, confronting him about the canceled cards, and they argue over what is the best course of action for Sharon's treatment. It's at this point in the story that we discover that Sharon was adopted, and Rose surmises that Sharon may have come from West Virginia, which is where Silent Hill is located. Rose concludes that as a final attempt at some sort of closure, Rose must bring Sharon there, despite Chris's objections. Outside, Sybil asks Sharon if everything is okay, and Sharon replies that she does not talk to strangers. Sybil then approaches Rose and asks her the same thing. Rose insists that the two of them are fine, and they speed off into the night towards Silent Hill, but not before Sybil Bennett can take down her license plate. Back on the highway, Rose is speeding towards Silent Hill, and Sybil Bennett tries to pull them over. We're not really sure why. Possibly she's suspicious about Rose, or perhaps Chris marked the car as stolen. Again, not really sure. In a snap decision, Rose decides to take off at high speeds to avoid Sybil. This is one of my only issues with the logic of this film, I don't really understand why Rose felt the need to just speed off like this. I mean, this is kind of like borderline child endangerment. I'm not really sure what the point of this was. I'm guessing that, you know, it's possible that if Rose allowed Sybil to pull them over, that she'd be forced to return home and, you know, thus wouldn't be able to get any answers as far as what's going on with Sharon. So instead of allowing Sybil to pull her over, she just floors it and takes off. Rose is hauling ass when she starts to get some white noise coming through on the car radio. This is an homage to the games and a gameplay mechanic where the player has a radio that emits white noise whenever a monster or an enemy is nearby. So Rose is fiddling with the radio when somebody walks into the middle of the road and causes Rose to veer off and crash. Rose wakes up an indeterminable amount of time later and discovers that Sharon has disappeared. This entire car crash sequence is more or less ripped from the first game, albeit with some plot elements moved around, but it's still a pretty welcome inclusion. This is where we get another deviation from the games, but it's in a pretty clever way. In Silent Hill 1 from '99, the town of Silent Hill is snowing. In Silent Hill 2, the town is very foggy. In the film, the town also appears to be experiencing a snowstorm, but what it actually is ash, something that alludes to the history of the town. It's important to mention here that the town of Silent Hill is essentially different to everyone who visits it. You know, it's sort of like your own personal hell. So anyway, the version in the film seems to be both foggy as well as raining ash. I really like this subtle change. You know, it works on a narrative level, as we'll get into, and it also serves to differentiate the film from the established canon of the games. Rose goes off looking for help and starts running, eventually passing by the iconic signage of the titular town. Rose eventually sees someone who looks like Sharon and takes off after her. She then descends into a subway or an underground terminal of some sort. We then hear the iconic and terrifying siren from far away. She continues her descent into the abyss. Rose continues searching for the person that she saw, and at this point it's getting very dark, so she uses a lighter to guide her way, something that would not be out of place in most Silent Hill games. Usually a flashlight is used, but a lighter is also not uncommon. Some of the ways that the camera moves in this film are sort of intended to mimic the perspective of the fixed camera angles that were pretty common in survival horror games of the time. Unlike games like Resident Evil, Silent Hill would occasionally use what I would consider dynamic camera angles that were, you know, put at a specific location to create a desired effect. So the siren from earlier actually serves to indicate when Silent Hill is shifting into the other world, which is the rusted industrial hellscape version of Silent Hill. Of course, Rose has just arrived, so she doesn't understand that that's what's happening as she descends into this abyss. But I will also say at this point that I really enjoy the way that this film depicts the other world. It's very true to the game, and it still looks pretty good to this day. So Rose enters this horrifying underground area, complete with rusted fencing and water pouring in from some unknown location. So she sees someone who looks like Sharon run by, and she follows her, only to be led to this corpse that is tied to a fence. The corpse is wearing some sort of protective suit. We're not really sure what that is, but we'll see it more later. So she assumes that it's a corpse, but upon further inspection, it would appear that this man is still very much alive, which is unfortunate given his current situation. This could be a possible reference to a hanging body found by Harry Mason in the first game, but I'm not 100% sure. So horrified, Rose begins to back away when she bumps into this kind of molten child monster. This monster is soon joined by many other monsters, and they attempt to swarm her. These monsters appear to be a reference or an interpretation of the Grey Children, first found in the original Silent Hill from 1999. So I will say that the effects on these Grey Children monsters hasn't aged terribly well, but the film also cleverly uses a lot of shadow and hides the effects pretty well. So it doesn't stick out too much, but if you look for too long, then you start to see some signs of some spotty mid-2000s CGI. So just when things are beginning to look dire, the monsters burn away into ash and Rose passes out. She somehow awakens back at the surface in a bowling alley, completely unharmed. The jukebox is playing Ring of Fire by Johnny Cash, a not-so-subtle bit of foreshadowing. The jukebox itself is a nice reference to the one found in Neely's bar in Silent Hill 2. Inside the bowling alley, we appear to get what looks like a nice matte painting effect, and I really enjoy matte paintings and was pleasantly surprised to see one here in this film. It really helps to add to that surreal, sort of off-kilter feel of the movie. So anyway, once she wakes up in the bowling alley, Rose takes right back off, running through the streets of Silent Hill, looking for Sharon. She runs to the edge of town, and the street has tapered off into a gray abyss, more iconic imagery from the games. A woman appears behind Rose, and she starts saying some cryptic things. The woman is revealed to be Dahlia Gillespie, a character from Silent Hill 1 and Silent Hill Origins. In the games, Dahlia is more of an antagonistic figure. For the film, Gans opted to make her more of a tragic, sympathetic character. We'll talk more about Dahlia later and the changes that they made with her character. Rose tells Dahlia that she's looking for her daughter, and Dahlia says something about how she was deceived and they hurt her daughter, a child named Alessa. Following this, Rose shows Dahlia a picture of Sharon. Dahlia becomes manic at the sight of Sharon, exclaiming, "She's mine." After this, we cut back to reality, where Sean Bean is retracing Rose's steps. He goes to a garage and asks the mechanic there if he's seen Rose, but no luck. He inquires about Silent Hill, and the mechanic tells him that the town is closed off, but he asks for directions anyway. We then cut back to Rose, and Rose has ran back to her broken down car, and inside the car she finds one of Sharon's creepy kid drawings. The drawing is depicting a school, so Rose decides that she's going to go to the school in Silent Hill and hopefully Sharon will be there. A nice piece of video game logic that I really appreciate. So she decides to head there after leaving Chris a message on her phone, which mostly comes through, but really is just white noise and static. Her journey to the school is cut short as Sybil arrives on the scene and attempts to arrest her. Sybil tries to contact the station, but only gets more static. So Sybil, not really recognizing that they've entered an alternate reality, insists on walking Rose back to the station on foot. We cut back to Chris here, and he's approaching the bridge to Silent Hill, but he's cut off by law enforcement. Chris is allowed to approach after revealing that the car that they're investigating from the car accident belonged to his wife, Rose. So after some deliberation, Chris teams up with Detective Thomas Gucci, and the two of them head off into Silent Hill to try to see what they can find. So this subplot of Chris Da Silva and Thomas Gucci is the one I was talking about earlier and was added in as a studio mandate. Some fans feel that this added subplot slows down the pacing of the film and doesn't really add anything narratively. I don't really disagree, but I also don't really hate it either. Mostly because we get some cool interactions because of this subplot, and we'll talk about those later on. So cutting back to Sybil and Rose, the two are locked in a heated debate. Sybil doesn't trust Rose because of an experience that she had early on in her career as a law enforcement officer where a child was in danger. And because of this, she has grown very skeptical of any situations where children could be in danger. So this really helps to solidify Sybil as a character who, exhibits a very motherly instinct and will go out of her way, perhaps stubbornly, to make sure that, any children in danger are taken care of. Thematically, this film definitely tackles themes of motherhood, so this is a welcome character trait. Again, on a narrative level. The two ladies come to the precipice of the Gray Abyss from earlier, and undeterred, Sybil insists that they go to a fire lookout tower on the other side of Toluca Lake. Toluca Lake is an iconic location from the games, primarily from Silent Hill 2. They don't get far before running into a monster, the Armless Man, which is a variation of the Lying Figure from Silent Hill 2. This is a long-running form of monster from the franchise. Other similar incarnations include the Straitjacket from Silent Hill Origins and the Smog Monster from Silent Hill Homecoming. The Armless Man shoots acid at Sybil and she opens fire on it. Rose uses the distraction to run from Sybil towards the school, still handcuffed. Rose arrives at Midwich Elementary School, an important location from the first Silent Hill game. She goes inside and notices a cult symbol on the stained glass window, something that'll be important later. She then finds a flashlight and a key ring, something that is very heavily featured in the games. In the games, you spend a lot of time backtracking to various locked rooms, gradually opening them up as you find various keys. So definitely enjoyed this inclusion. We cut back to Chris and Detective Gucci as they patrol the empty streets of Silent Hill. Gucci tells Chris some of the history of the town. They talk about the fire that ruined the town and the lives of the people who used to live there. So apparently a fire happened back in the 70s in Silent Hill, and it rendered the town uninhabitable, which would explain why in the version of Silent Hill that Rose and Sybil are in, there is this ash that is, sort of pouring down from the heavens. We cut back to Rose as she searches the school for Sharon. She hears a noise and goes to investigate, but instead of Sharon, she sees an ominous group of masked figures. She hides in a classroom and she finds a desk with some fresh handprints on it. She opens the desk to discover that it used to belong to Alessa, the daughter of the woman Dahlia from earlier in the film. So she catches a glimpse again of Sharon/Alessa. We're not really sure who it is yet at this point. And she takes off after her through the school once more. So there's this motif in the games of, the main character chasing after a child. We see it with Harry Mason looking for Cheryl. We see it with Alex Shepard looking for Josh. And we see it with James Sunderland looking for Laura. So Rose finds herself in a bathroom and begins to hear a girl crying. She starts to check the stall doors, which is another staple from survival horror video games, and she discovers a grisly scene of a body strung up in a grotesque way with some barbed wire. Above the body, there is a message written on the wall alluding to the fact that there is something in the corpse's mouth. This is yet another motif from the games. This idea that the main character has to stick their hand in some unsavory place in order to find an item that will be required for progressing. So she grabs the key ring from the corpse's mouth and she heads out into the hallway. But in the hallway, the masked men from earlier are there. So she doubles back into the bathroom and she locks the door with the keyring that she found earlier. While the men try to get inside, we get this really awesome shot of the camera going above Rose, over the door, and into the hallway all in one take. The men have a canary in a cage, and after a while it starts to bug out. And not long after, the siren sounds once again and the environment begins to transition into the other world. While this is going on, the corpse in the stall has seemingly come to life, and it begins to slide towards Rose, all the while doing some freaky shit with its tongue, I might add. Rose escapes the bathroom and sees that the masked men from earlier have now been swarmed with creepers, also known as beetles, another inclusion from the games. They are meant to be a manifestation of Alessa's dislike for insects. During this otherworld sequence, when Rose is running through the school, we get a quick POV perspective shot. My guess is that it's here to remind the audience that they are watching a video game movie. It's a real quick thing, sort of like a blink and you'll miss it thing. Silent Hill obviously not known for its first-person gameplay, but nonetheless, it's a welcome inclusion. Rose catches a glimpse of Alessa scribbling furiously on a piece of paper, and in the process of making eye contact, proceeds to fall from a great height. We then cut back to Chris and Gucci looking for Rose and Sharon. They themselves are inside the normal version of the school, without any bugs or freaky tongue monsters. We then cut back to Rose and she has come to in a large courtyard. And here is where we get our first look at Pyramid Head. So Pyramid Head is a point of contention for many Silent Hill fans. Many will argue that the presence of Pyramid Head outside of anything but Silent Hill 2 makes no sense. Pyramid Head is meant to be a direct manifestation of James Sunderland's inner trauma. It's directly tailored to his experience. So Pyramid Head existing outside of any scenario where James Sunderland is not present is understandably bothersome to many fans. However, his iconic visage and intimidating presence have made him a mainstay of the franchise. At this point, he is synonymous with the franchise, and he's gone on to appear in many other forms of Silent Hill media. Obviously, this film, as well as other games and comics, and novels as well. Personally, I understand the decision to include him in the movie. He has this larger-than-life persona, this very menacing aura about him. And he just looks good on screen. So Rose takes off in the courtyard away from Pyramid Head, and there's this really cool shot here where she's running through the courtyard, and the film does this thing where it will show that below our characters is this hellish abyss that is, bubbling just below the surface. This is meant to symbolize the fire that's still burning underneath the town, and might even be implying that that fire is representative of hell itself. So here we cut back to the two men, Chris and Gucci, and they are in the same outdoor courtyard that Rose is in. Really, the main reason that I don't mind their inclusion in the plot, Chris and Gucci, is that here we get this cool scene where Rose is running by and Chris is facing her in the opposite realities. And despite being in opposite realities, when Rose runs by Chris, he's able to smell her perfume in real time. Pretty cool stuff. Conceptually, I think that's very interesting. Also, in this scene, when they're going through the school, we get some cool transitions where, you know, the camera will pan from Chris, and as the camera pans, we're getting a transition from their reality to Rose's reality. So Rose is at her wit's end, and she proceeds to break down crying, and shortly after she is swarmed by more creepers. Sybil arrives just in time and saves her by barricading the two of them in a large room with an industrial-sized fan, a trademark of Silent Hill Otherworld locales. Sybil remarks that she's on her last mag, perhaps a subtle allusion to the fact that ammo is a very finite resource in the games. What follows this is a very tense sequence where Pyramid Head tries to gain access to the room by piercing the wall with his great knife. The hole from his weapon allows more creepers to crawl inside, but it also allows Sybil to fire off some rounds at Pyramid Head. Eventually, Pyramid Head gives up and leaves, and all the bugs die and turn to ash, and the environment reverts back to the normal version of Silent Hill. I say normal here, but we should probably establish real quick that there are, in fact, 3 different versions of Silent Hill depicted in this movie. So there's the version that Chris and Gucci are in, there's the gray purgatory version that Rose and Sybil are in, and then there's the Otherworld version of that version that they will regularly transition back and forth from. So now, having bonded, Rose and Sybil decide to start working together. We learn that the key that Rose got from the corpse in the bathroom stall is a key to a hotel, and Rose concludes that this must be where Sharon is. Cutting back to Chris and Gucci, the two have left the town after a fruitless search. Gucci insists that Chris need not worry and, urges him not to pursue things further. Chris decides not to listen and correctly assumes that Gucci and the rest of the police force are not telling him everything. Driving away, he calls Toluca County Archives and asks to see some files, but he's told that the records that he wants to see are confidential. Cutting back to Sybil and Rose, they have just arrived at the Grand Hotel, a reference to the Lakeview Hotel from Silent Hill 2. The Grand Hotel itself would actually go on to be featured in Silent Hill Homecoming in 2008. As they approach, they hear 2 women arguing. One of them is Dahlia from earlier, and another woman named Anna. Dahlia flees as Rose and Sybil approach. After talking with Anna, they learn that she has been foraging for food for a woman named Christabella. Apparently Christabella is a woman who keeps us safe inside the town church. Rose pleads with Anna to help them find Sharon, but she isn't much help. Sybil comments on a symbol on the ground, the same symbol that Rose saw back at the school. Anna tells them that it's a symbol of their unity and faith. This is the emblem of Christabella's congregation, a pious group of zealots who reside in this version of Silent Hill. Sybil finds another one of Sharon's drawings in the mail slot for room 111. So, as any good Silent Hill game would suggest, they need to head to room 111. I really like this approach to moving the plot forward. It makes sense on a narrative level and on a video game level as well. So it's a little bit of fun. We then cut back to Chris, and he has just broken into the Brahms archives. Brahms is a small neighboring town of Silent Hill, first mentioned in Silent Hill 1. The records are all burned and worn, perhaps alluding to the events that preceded their recovery. Chris discovers a photo of Alessa, which bears a striking resemblance to his daughter, Sharon. The trouble is that the picture is from 1974, so clearly something is off. He also finds further records from Toluca County Orphanage, so he heads there seeking further information. We then cut back to the 3 women as they head for room 111. They can't seem to find the room, but they do find a large painting in the hallway of a witch burning, perhaps a bit of foreshadowing. Anna delivers some exposition about how the founders of the town used to burn witches to ward off the apocalypse. She also hints that maybe some remnants of this archaic order still linger in the town today. Rose instead instinctually deduces that the door to room 111 must be behind this painting. Secret rooms, paintings, and the use of a knife are all staples of the Silent Hill franchise. So the room that they enter has a big hole in the wall, leading to another building next to it that they're able to access through the hole. They appear to have entered a factory of some sort. Rose sees someone who quickly scurries off yet again. One of the few minor complaints I have with this film is just how often the film uses Sharon/Alessa to lead Rose from place to place. It's just kind of lazy, but I suppose it works on a narrative level. It's consistent with the games as well, but it just starts to get kind of old after a while, as far as a cinematic experience goes. Anyway, Rose gives chase with the other two women trailing behind. Rose sees Sharon/Alessa crying on the other side of a large chasm, so she uses a makeshift swing and some balance beams to get to her. Here we are treated to another one of Akira Yamaoka's iconic tracks, Promise. First heard in Silent Hill 2, and it's been appropriated here in the film to serve as Sharon/Alessa's theme song. It's really a beautiful piece of music, and it elevates the film so much. Rose sees that the girl is in fact not Sharon, but looks very similar. Rose asks her where Sharon is, but suffice it to say, she does not get a straight answer.
I'm burning.
Rose tells the other two women that she saw Dahlia's daughter, who, if not Sharon, must be Alessa, the girl that they've been chasing all over town all along. The three women survey their surroundings, with Rose instinctually feeling that something really bad happened here before. Before they can theorize further, Anna starts to panic, stating that the darkness is coming and that they need to leave. As Rose stares up at the church, she recalls Sharon's drawing from earlier, which seems to depict the church but in flames, further foreshadowing. Various townsfolk, also trapped in this purgatory version of Silent Hill with Rose, all flee to the church, which seems to be some sort of safe haven within the town. Dahlia warns Sybil and Rose that the other townsfolk are not to be trusted. Before going inside, Rose questions Dahlia about Alessa and how it is that they all came to be trapped within Silent Hill. Dahlia simply offers more cryptic warnings about vengeance before the town transitions into the other world. What follows this is probably the creepiest, most disturbing sequence in the entire film. We get these droning, chanting sounds, and Pyramid Head materializes behind Anna. He grabs her and carries her up the steps towards the door of the church, where Rose and Sybil stand waiting. Pyramid Head proceeds to rip off Anna's clothes, followed by her fucking skin, and then proceeds to hurl said skin at the door of the church. Every shot of this sequence is grisly and horrific, and looks like it could be a Renaissance painting. So Sybil and Rose enter the church just in time to avoid getting slapped by Anna's skin, but not quickly enough to avoid getting sprayed with her blood. Sick stuff. Once inside, Sybil and Rose are quickly accused of being witches by the members of the church. They are almost mobbed by the procession before Sybil lets a round off in the air. Rose and Sybil are approached by Christabella, the woman that Anna told them about earlier. She is clearly the leader of this fanatical cult of religious zealots. The church is a safe haven for them, seemingly the only place in the entire town that the darkness cannot reach. We then cut to the Toluca County orphanage, where Chris has arrived and is demanding information as to where Sharon came from. Chris is just about to get physical with a nun when Gucci arrives and arrests him. Gucci takes Chris to another room, sits him down, and begins to explain things. So basically, Chris is assuming that the woman in the picture that he found must be Sharon's real mother, based on the striking similarity that they have. Gucci explains that he did know the girl in the picture, but that she did not make it through the night, that the fire broke out that rendered the town uninhabitable. He goes on to say that there were some religious fanatics who did terrible things to this girl 30 years ago. Their discussion ends with Gucci telling Chris that he can either allow him to handle things here in Silent Hill, or he can arrest Chris and he will go to jail. Back at the church, Rose and Christabella talk about what Rose is doing here in Silent Hill. Eventually, Christabella tells Rose that only the demon knows where Sharon is. Sybil, being the ride or die that she is, decides to go with Rose in search of Sharon, seeking information from this demon. Christabella and her zealots suit up and escort Rose and Sybil to Brookhaven Hospital, another famous location from Silent Hill 2 and 3 primarily, but has also been featured in other Silent Hill media. The hospital in the film here is sort of an amalgam of both Brookhaven Hospital and Alchemilla Hospital, combining elements of both. Christabella shows Rose a map of the hospital that seems to be ripped right out of the games. Christabella explains that the demon is in the basement of the hospital and that it hides behind the face of an innocent. Despite Christabella not really expecting Rose to return, she is kind enough to open an elevator. She also arms her with a big-ass flashlight. Rose memorizes the map and begins to prepare for her descent. So before she goes, Christabella reveals that she found Rose's locket, and she goes to give it back to her, but as she does, the locket opens, and Christabella sees the face of Sharon, who, bearing the striking resemblance of Alessa, triggers Christabella, and she immediately starts accusing Rose of being a witch. The Zealots attempt to apprehend Rose and Sybil, but Sybil, being the badass that she is, fires a couple rounds off, giving Rose the time that she needs to descend in the elevator down to the basement. So while Rose begins her descent in the elevator, Sybil is beaten by the Zealots and taken back to the church. Down in the basement, Rose begins to navigate the labyrinthine halls until she comes face to face with perhaps the second most iconic enemies from the Silent Hill franchise, these being the nurses. The nurses are a staple of the franchise, appearing in nearly every single game in the franchise with the exception of Shattered Memories and Silent Hill 4: The Room. The nurses symbolize different things across different games and can vary visually as far as how sexualized they are. In this film, they are somewhat busty, but nothing I would deem to be too exploitative. Anyway, Rose is staring down an entire hallway of them, and they begin to approach her before she realizes that they are attracted to her flashlight. So she turns it off and all the nurses suddenly become very still. In what is undoubtedly the most suspenseful scene in the entire film, Rose has to slip past their motionless bodies without touching them or making any noise. She almost makes it through unscathed, but accidentally triggers one of the nurses. With a well-placed flashlight, she's able to distract all of them and proceeds to book it down the hallway to the room where the demon resides. Rose enters the room and is met with a blinding light and a disembodied voice telling her that her reward for coming this far is the truth. So this is the big exposition dump of the movie where we discover the truth about Alessa. Growing up in 1970s Silent Hill, Alessa was an outcast from her religious classmates. This is because she was born out of wedlock and she did not have a father around. So one day, Alessa is unfortunately assaulted and taken advantage of by the school janitor. So Christabella, who is the sister of Dahlia, Alessa's mother, holds this resentment towards Dahlia for refusing to name the father. So this kind of just brings shame to their family and the town overall in her eyes. Christabella then insinuates that the incident with the janitor only happened because Alessa is impure. Christabella convinces Dahlia to give Alessa to the church for purification. Dahlia immediately regrets this decision when she realizes that this purification process is not something that Alessa will survive. In the attempt to burn Alessa alive for being a witch, the fire gets out of control, and it's revealed that this is the fire that is responsible for rendering the town uninhabitable. Gucci himself arrived on the scene and attempted to help Alessa, but unfortunately he was too late. During Alessa's hospitalization, her anger towards the town grew and grew, and manifested into an entity that would allow her to enact her vengeance against the town. So Alessa's spirit here split into two, one half manifesting as the entity Dark Alessa. Essentially, this entity was drawn to Alessa's hatred. It sensed her anger and it came to her promising that she would be able to reenact her vengeance. The other half of her spirit manifested as Sharon. Sharon embodies Alessa's innocence and was somehow later manifested into the real world as a newborn baby, where she was later adopted by Rose and Chris. So after this big exposition dump, Rose materializes into an old, rundown hospital room. In this room, we have a single nurse who bears a striking resemblance to Lisa Garland, a character from the games who was responsible for the treatment of Alessa during her hospitalization. We then discover that Sharon has been in town all along, kept safe by the members of the congregation. Christabella plans to immolate Sharon, finishing what they started all those years ago. So Rose is confronted by the dark part of Alessa, and Rose, after some talking, agrees to allow the dark part of Alessa into her body. What this will do is allow the darkness to bypass the protection of the church. In doing so, they will be able to enact Alessa's vengeance, and Rose will be able to save Sharon. So here we get one last scene of Detective Gucci and Chris, and Gucci is sending Chris off. Chris warns him that he will be back with others who can help him. So in an attempt to dissuade Chris from doing so and, just generally make him feel better, he tells him about Sybil, the cop who is most likely with his wife. He basically tells her about Sybil's experience and how she is willing to do whatever it takes to make sure that a child in danger is safe. So only armed with reassurances and empty promises, Chris has to go home without his family. Back at the church, the finale is underway. The pyre is lit and Sybil and Sharon are both about to be offered up as sacrifices. What follows this is an incredibly disturbing and hard to watch scene. Sybil tells Sharon not to be afraid and that her mother is coming to save her. Then Sybil is burned alive in an extremely harrowing sequence that leaves nothing to the imagination. Naturally, I cannot show it here. Rose bursts into the church and witnesses the body of Sybil. Revolted by her discovery, she descends upon the congregation and reveals to them that they are all already dead, having died in the fire back in '74. Basically, she just kind of, lets them know that nothing can save them from this purgatory of their own making. Rose defies Christabella and exposes her lies, but for her efforts, she is stabbed by Christabella. Rose falls to the floor, but her blood brings about the presence of the dark part of Alessa. From here, the church begins to transition into the other world. Alessa's burned body rises from the abyss created in the center of the church, while an intense organ score sets the scene for vengeance to be done. Alessa controls hordes of barbed wire tentacles that all seem to emanate from her hospital bed. Her eerie visage is very reminiscent of many Silent Hill bosses, so this is very appropriate for the finale of the film. Christabella is strung up by these barbed wire tentacles and murdered by Alessa in an extremely violent manner that I cannot describe or even show in any sort of detail for fear of being demonetized. Dahlia looks on in horror at her daughter's rampage, completely undone by what her daughter has become. Amidst all the chaos, Rose finally finds Sharon and saves her and begins to comfort her. As this is happening, Alessa approaches Sharon and we cut to black. Rose and Sharon wake up in the church where everyone is gone except for Dahlia. Dahlia wonders why she was spared by Alessa, to which Rose responds with a line from earlier in the film.
Mother is God in the eyes of a child.
At this point in the film, my interpretation is that Sharon and Alessa have reunited into one body, while the dark part of Alessa has taken the religious zealots of Silent Hill down into hell with her. Rose and Sharon begin the journey home. On the way back, Rose attempts to call Chris, but it just comes through as white noise. When they arrive home, they discover that they are still somehow in this foggy, purgatory dimension of Silent Hill. They walk around their house, finally home, but also not. Something seems to be off with Sharon, but we don't really know what. Chris awakens from a nap to see that the door is open, but nobody is home. He looks around for his wife and daughter as the rain pours outside. And that, my friends, is Silent Hill 2006. The film, while admittedly not perfect, undeniably exudes a deep understanding of the tone and the spirit of the games. Silent Hill, while having distinct lore and continuity, also functions as an anthology series of sorts, featuring a new protagonist with each installment. Each story is sort of self-contained and tailored to the traumas of the main character. In this way, Silent Hill 2006 functions as both its own unique story and also a love letter to the series, featuring many iconic locations and creatures. The first game, Silent Hill 1, features the character Harry Mason, as I mentioned earlier. Harry Mason ventures to Silent Hill to find his missing daughter, Cheryl. So plot-wise, this is the biggest similarity from the first game to the movie, except Harry Mason is swapped to Rose, who is a woman. It is exceedingly rare for a video game adaptation to be adapted by a legitimate die-hard fan of the game itself, while also having little to no studio interference. It is for all these reasons that I personally believe that Silent Hill 2006 is the best, most faithful adaptation of a video game ever made. With that being said, I will acknowledge that the film does have some flaws. The lack of character development for Rose is something that people often cite as an issue, as well as the bloated runtime, pacing, and convoluted story. And then you have some diehard Silent Hill fans who just wanted a one-to-one adaptation of the first game. As someone who's been banging the drum for a direct adaptation of the first Resident Evil game, I can't really knock anyone who wanted that from this movie. I will argue though that in the case of Silent Hill, with its almost anthological nature, that it makes sense for Gans to take the approach that he did. The really cool thing is that even if you haven't played any of the games, this film still works. Of course, fans will recognize familiar names and locations, but the heart of the film is derived from the unique story elements and doesn't rely too heavily on fan service in order to get from A to B. I will provide a disclaimer here to any diehard Silent Hill fans watching this video. I am by no means an expert in Silent Hill. I am of course a fan, but I still have many other games left to play. So if I got some things wrong, please feel free to correct me in the comments, but take it easy on me. Alright guys, so that is Silent Hill 2006. Please let me know down in the comments, what do you think of this movie? Do you disagree? Is there a better video game movie out there in your opinion? I would love to hear your thoughts on that, so please let me know. Also, if there are connections to the games that I missed from this film, drop those down in the comments too. I'm sure there's a couple things that I probably missed. Christoph Gans has reportedly filmed a sequel to this film called Return to Silent Hill. At the time of this recording, we don't really have a release date yet for it, but I'm pretty excited for it. I don't really expect it to be as good as this movie is, but you know, I'm really glad that he was able to take another crack at the franchise after the abysmal movie that was Silent Hill Revelation. Alright guys, so like the video if you liked it, subscribe if you haven't. We talk about new movies, old movies, physical media, and horror in general. So with all that being said, please take care and watch more movies.